Irish greeting. Ireland's Prime Minister is in Washington to meet the president, and pro-life groups have a message for him. Surprise in Pennsylvania. A Democrat is poised to win a special election in a heavily Republican district. We have reaction. Civil war continues. We examine the humanitarian crisis in Syria as the war enters its 8th year. And a personal touch, Vatican correspondent Juliette Lindley takes us inside daily life covering the Pope. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, March 15th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump welcomes a world leader who is pushing for access to abortion. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar came to the White House a day after pro-life leaders in the U.S. handed him a letter calling for pro-life protections in his predominantly Catholic country. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Varadkar is in the U.S. for his country's traditional St. Patrick's Day visit. He wants to legalize abortion in Ireland, a place historically known for protecting unborn babies.
Mr. Prime Minister, it's great to have you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation to be here.
President Trump welcomes Ireland's youngest prime minister to the White House. Leo Varadkar has promised unrestricted abortion in the first 12 weeks of pregnancy if voters approve a repeal of Ireland's 8th Amendment, a law that protects the right to life.
Ireland has protected unborn children through constitutional amendment for 35 years. And it's very sad that they are actually considering a changing of that.
Carol Tobias is the president of National Right to Life. The organization was one of 17 pro-life groups which signed a letter to Prime Minister Varadkar asking him to take a stand for life and uphold the 8th Amendment. The letter was hand-delivered to him yesterday before he gave a speech in Washington.
America was born to be a shining city on a hill with the eyes of the world upon you, sending out a message of freedom and hope for all those who would see it.
But now eyes are on the Irish, and Tobias says they can give hope to the unborn and save generations to come by voting to keep the 8th Amendment.
I don't know why any country would want to kill their children, and I would strongly encourage them to save their babies. This is their future.
A Planned Parenthood lawyer once called Ireland the jewel in the crown of the pro-life movement. In their letter to Prime Minister Varadkar, pro-life leaders write, "But Ireland isn't just a jewel for the pro-life movement, it is a beacon of hope for the entire world. Ireland has become one of the leaders in demonstrating life-affirming laws and medical treatment."
I would encourage everyone to just stand up and say whether or not I like this Prime Minister, he's wrong. We do not kill babies in Ireland.
We'll keep following this story. We'll find out if voters in Ireland keep or repeal that life-protecting amendment on May 25th. Lauren?
Mark, is there any indication how the Irish will vote?
Well, according to a poll from the Sunday Business Post, a national newspaper in Ireland, 60% support repeal of the 8th Amendment, while 51% support abortion up to 12 weeks of pregnancy. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. The White House announces sanctions against 19 Russian citizens for alleged interference in the 2016 election. It includes the 13 indicted last month by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Moscow says it is taking the announcement in stride, but adds it's planning to retaliate. Paul Manafort, President Trump's former campaign manager, asks a federal judge to dismiss 5 of the conspiracy and foreign lobbying violations he is facing. Manafort was indicted by the special counsel investigating possible collusion by the Russians in the 2016 election, but his lawyer says the charges date from his work with Ukraine. They should be withdrawn because they predate his time on the president's campaign. Manafort has pleaded not guilty to all charges. As we go on the air, the contested congressional race in Pennsylvania still has not been called. The Democrat claims victory, but the Republican is exploring a recount and even a lawsuit. Correspondent Jason Calvi is back on Capitol Hill after a trip to Pennsylvania. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening to you, Lauren. Democrat Connor Lamb holds a 627-vote lead over Republican Rick Saccone. A Democrat doing so well in a longtime Republican stronghold is the talk here at the Capitol.
Both of these candidates, the Republican and the Democrat, ran as conservatives.
ran as pro-gun, pro-life, anti-Nancy Pelosi conservatives.
But Speaker Paul Ryan is wrong. Democrat Connor Lamb publicly says he's for abortion, even after 20 weeks.
In my district, that's not considered pro-life, but maybe that works in Pennsylvania.
He told the Weekly Standard, "I don't use the term pro-life to describe what I personally believe because that's a political term. It's not one that you learn in Catholic school or anywhere else in the church." In fact, the Vatican website lists more than 160 references to Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis using the term pro-life. Connor Lamb also touts his Catholic schooling in this campaign ad.
He grew up here, went to Central Catholic. Then,
as Capitol Hill comes to terms with a most likely Republican loss, GOP lawmakers play down the national implications.
You know, the Democrat figured out how to win in Pennsylvania. You take every one of the president's planks in his platform and run on Trump's platform, and you win. So actually, it's a victory for Trump.
Democrats on the Hill, with a new surge of confidence, say they've got a lot of work ahead in order to flip 24 House seats needed to reclaim the majority.
A blue wave alone does not make a majority for us. It'll require champions in each district to rise up and have a strong economic message to grow the middle class again in the United States.
Election officials have finished counting all absentee votes, but still uncounted 375 provisional, military, and overseas ballots. I spoke to a recent grad of Central Catholic. That's the school Lamb attended. Christian Romano tells me his Pittsburgh school did, in fact, teach about that pro-life cause. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Cardinal John Rebat visits Capitol Hill and is pressuring lawmakers to take action on climate change. The Cardinal is from Papua New Guinea and is especially concerned about the Trump administration's new policies permitting deep-sea mining and what it will do to his nation's fishing industry.
We have not heard enough information telling us about the negative impact to the marine environment, to the marine life, and also to the environment, and also for the well-being of our people.
The Cardinal's visit included a meeting with Democratic Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts, who chairs the Senate Climate Change Task Force. Thousands of innocent men, women, and children are fleeing the suburbs of Damascus in what appears to be a mass exodus. This, the latest in Syria's civil war, which started 7 years ago today. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has reaction from the Pentagon. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Defense officials here are pointing the finger squarely at Russia, saying it's the Russians who are enabling Syrian President Bashar Assad, even as he represses his own citizens and supports airstrikes that are forcing those thousands of people to flee.
Russia agrees to a ceasefire, but supports a regime that continues bombing innocent civilians. As Secretary Mattis said earlier this week, Russia is either incompetent, committing illegal acts, or both.
Pentagon chief spokesperson Dana White calling out Russia for not taking steps to stop the evacuations from the Damascus suburb of Ghouta. The Syrian government launched an assault there more than 3 weeks ago.
Russia could stop the civilian casualties in Syria. Instead, their double dealing is exacerbating the loss of innocent lives.
Thousands of civilians have been streaming out of the area, crossing on foot and in pickup trucks, carrying their only belongings like clothes, suitcases, and mattresses. Human rights groups estimate some 12,000 have fled this week, but hundreds of thousands more remain.
I'm in a bedroom. What was a bedroom? I'm a little nervous, as you can see.
This American woman, now living in the besieged suburbs, describing the damage she found in her neighbor's house.
It's no longer safe to live here.
She's calling on President Donald Trump to put more pressure on Russia to, quote, stop bombing us. The Catholic organization, Caritas International, is helping support those like this boy, who lost his father and his legs in a bomb blast. Caritas says Syria has become the largest displacement crisis in the world, estimating around 6 million people have fled their homes in the past 7 years. Half of them are still trapped in hard-to-reach areas. Pentagon officials have been careful not to directly call for Syrian President Bashar Assad being ousted. Instead, they say they want to work with the UN and their allies to find a diplomatic solution in Syria. But it's clear behind closed doors that the U.S. and many other countries say Assad needs to go. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the Pentagon. Thank you, Wyatt. Upcoming denuclearization talks between North Korea and the United States might take place in Sweden. That country has had diplomatic relations with the communist country since 1973. North Korea's foreign minister is visiting the Scandinavian nation. It is seen as a first step toward hosting talks between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. The Philippines is withdrawing from the United Nations International Criminal Court. President Duterte is facing a possible UN complaint over thousands of suspects killed in his anti-drug crackdown. A Philippine spokesman says the court cannot have jurisdiction over the government's war on drugs. Critics say the exit could lead to a worsening of the country's human rights conditions. Catholic leaders in Iceland join Muslim and Jewish officials in condemning the country's proposal to ban circumcision. The proposal says parents would face 6 years in prison if their sons have a non-medical circumcision. The cardinals in charge of the European bishops' conferences say the initiative is against religious freedom. China claims it is cracking down on illegal organ transplants. At a conference at the Vatican, Beijing says it has arrested hundreds of traffickers over the last 10 years. The country had come under criticism for harvesting organs from executed prisoners, a practice it says stopped in 2015. And the Vatican admits it altered a photo sent to the media of a letter from Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI about Pope Francis. A spokesman for the Holy Father says the Vatican blurred the two final lines of the first page of the letter Benedict sent to Francis this week to mark the 5-year anniversary of the election of Francis. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Ed, this has caused some concern. It's been just about a month since the Pope issued a message warning against fake news. What happened in this case?
Well, it's being termed Lettergate, Lauren. It's about this letter that Benedict sent to the head of the Vatican Secretariat for Communications, Monsignor Vigano, really thanking him and talking about books that he was sent, 11 books on the theology of Pope Francis. But the pictures of the Pope's letter, Pope Benedict's letter, was doctored, and a missing paragraph, which made it seem as though he'd read the books, when in fact he hadn't. It was in the missing paragraph that he hadn't read all the books and that he wouldn't be in the near future.
Well, so what did the Pope Emeritus actually say in the letter?
Well, he talked about, he applauded the people for writing the books, first of all, but he also said there's a foolish prejudice about where there's that Pope Francis is considered to have a lack of theological formation, while Benedict is said to be out of touch with the concrete lives of Christians. He said that's a foolish prejudice, but he also praised Pope Francis for his theological and philosophical formation and spoke of an inner continuity between the two pontificates, which he says he derived from the books that he'd been given.
So he didn't read the books, and the Vatican said he read the books. So what are the consequences?
Well, the consequences and the concerns, really. I mean, the concern is that these aren't matching the journalistic standards which are really held internationally, not to doctor photos. And there's also a problem because a lot of the photos coming out of the Vatican, journalists rely on because we don't get photos from anyone else. So that's one of the problems. But the consequences probably won't be any. There have been a lot of deceptions over the past 5 years in various different ways, but nobody's really been held accountable, and that probably will be the same in this case.
Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thank you, Ed.
Thanks, Lauren.
Coming up, the money man. Catholic Larry Kudlow accepts the president's offer to be chief economic advisor. And the U.S. Catholic bishops urge support of the First Amendment Defense Act. We explain. Stocks turn higher today as investors seem encouraged by the president's pick for his new economic advisor. Larry Kudlow, a Catholic, says he is on board with President Trump's agenda, including reducing the trade imbalance with China. Following the news, the Dow Jones was up in the U.S. Stocks also rose across Europe, but were mixed in Asia. Joining us now via Skype is Stephen Moore, former senior economic advisor to President Trump's presidential campaign and distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome back to the program, Steve.
Great to be with you.
Not to mention that Larry was the best man at your wedding. So I think you know what we're talking about here.
He and I are pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Right.
By the way, I have to say this because this is the Catholic audience. People don't realize that Larry had a drug addiction problem about 20 years ago, and it was a very severe problem, and he was able to conquer that through finding Christ, and it's a great story of redemption. I think
a conversion story.
It's a great story, and I think people when they learn that about him, he talks about it openly, and it's a great thing, and it shows the power of Christ in our lives.
It sure does. And during the campaign, Larry supported President Trump's pro-life views and called his opposition to abortion, quote, a wonderful thing. And he wrote during the campaign that we need pro-life, pro-growth king Donald Trump. He seems very ideologically in line with the president's views on social issues.
That's right. Well, but I think Larry's main thing will be growing the economy, obviously. He's going to be essentially now the chief economic advisor to the president, and I can't think of anybody better. He's a great communicator. He had his own TV show for 15 years talking about finance and economics and had a big following. And, Donald Trump needs somebody with great ideas and great communication skills. I think it'll be a great partnership, and look for more great growth initiatives coming out of this White House.
Well, last time you were on the show, Steve, we were talking about aluminum and steel tariffs, and the two of you co-wrote an op-ed in the National Review saying tariffs are like a tax hike, and they shouldn't be happening. And then the president said, we're going ahead with tariffs. Gary Cohn left the White House because he didn't agree. So now, why is he choosing Larry?
Well, look, that's not exactly the whole story. I mean, we did write a very tough piece on Trump's initial call for an across-the-board tariff against all countries on steel and aluminum. And we were, I think, successful in getting Donald Trump to pare that back a little bit and target the tariffs towards the countries that are bad actors and the countries that are not following the law, including countries like China and countries like Russia. And I think Larry's very comfortable with that we should use tariffs as a weapon against the countries that are violating our laws. It's just one example. China steals from the United States about $500 billion a year of our technology and our patents and our copyrights and those things. Well, if one country is stealing, that's not free trade.
And that is exactly what President Trump has said and has been campaigning on. The U.S. market reacted, as I said earlier, up. Asian shares mixed. Why is that? It's really probably due to China and their stance on trade.
I do think that there's going to be a coming conflict in trade with the United States and China. I do think sometime in the next couple of months, Donald Trump may call for a tariff on all Chinese goods, in order to reduce our gigantic trade deficit with China, try to get them to buy more of our wheat and cotton and computers and all the other things we produce, but also because, look at what they're doing in terms of their military policy. They've enabled North Korea to get a nuclear bomb. We can't allow that to stand. And also, as I just mentioned, if a country is stealing $500 billion a year, you got to do something about that. You got to retaliate. And I applaud Trump for doing that.
Steve Moore, former senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign, distinguished fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Anytime.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops urges support for a bill that would protect those who believe marriage is between one woman and one man. In a statement about their support of the First Amendment, the bishops say, in part, they stand for the right of all people to, quote, exercise their religious beliefs and moral convictions in public life without fear of government discrimination. A judge put an Ohio state law on hold that bans abortions based on a diagnosis of Down syndrome. Ohio Right to Life, a pro-life group that championed the law, criticized the judge's ruling, saying it's a tragedy that the court prioritized abortion on demand over special needs children. And tonight on EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly, Catherine Hadro talks to one woman who explains why she opted for embryo adoption. That's when an already frozen embryo is implanted. The babies are known as snowflake babies.
I felt that, with snowflakes, that we could give a life a chance that way, that have already been created.
You can watch the entire interview tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern on EWTN. Visit EWTN.com for other airings of the show. Up next, on Holy Ground, our Vatican correspondent, Juliette Lindley, describes her life covering Pope Francis. And an answer to prayers. We'll tell you why a Christian woman jailed in Pakistan says she received a miracle. 228 years ago today, George Washington pens a letter to Roman Catholics in America. The first president of the U.S. writes about a country, quote, under the smiles of a divine providence, the protection of a good government, and the cultivation of manners, morals, and piety. Speaking of manners, morals, and piety, Juliette Lindley is our eyes and ears at the Vatican. Most days you can catch her here on EWTN News Nightly, reporting from the roof of the EWTN Rome Bureau offices in many different outfits. We have been blessed this week to have her here in Washington. Look how beautiful you are.
Stop.
I want to go shopping with you. We have had so many questions about your accent. You know, you're in Rome, but you don't have an Italian accent, and we're not sure if it's British, so the viewers want to know, where are you from?
Okay, it's a Vatican accent. How about that? No. My father's from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and his mother was from China, Chinese origins, and his father from St. Vincent, another island, whereas my mother is Swiss. So they met in the UK, and at home we always spoke English, and I grew up in Rome, but going to the British school. How about that?
Wow, I don't think I could repeat that, but it's fascinating. You've just grown up everywhere. It's fabulous. What's it like covering the Pope every single day? Your steps from St. Peter's, it's just beautiful. I love when we get to see that, and the Christmas tree was out, and you had such a beautiful background. What's been your highlight of covering the Vatican?
It's such a privilege to cover such a unique beat and to combine my faith with my passion for journalism. So if I have to choose one highlight, and there have been many, can I say it was visiting the Sistine Chapel at 6 a.m. with the keykeeper of the Vatican.
Wow, and the lights are going on. Look at that. Did they just go on when you got in there?
They flipped the switch, and it was simply amazing. And you know, this is a little nugget. I was chatting to Gianni, and he's from a little village in Calabria, and he says when he goes back, he is like a rock star. He's like, all of the ladies want their daughters to marry him because he is the keykeeper of the Vatican.
Well,
Isn't that cute?
Fabulous. And I remember seeing he had so many keys.
15 pounds. 300 keys.
That he carries around with him all the time.
Yes.
Okay, I thought my job was hard, right? So next week, we are going to focus on Catholic women. We're doing a series of interviews because I think it's really important to showcase women in all different walks of life who are working in business or politics or stay-at-home moms who are living their faith through their lives and through their work. Tell me, you're a working mom, just like me, and you are working, and it's a hard job to be a journalist. So how do you balance your faith, your family, EWTN News Nightly?
It's a juggling job, isn't it, Lauren? We've talked about it and how sometimes you wish that you could be right there when they come out of school and pick them up, and you can't always do that. But I think we try our best. We go to the American parish in Rome, St. Patrick's. My children did their first communion there, and so did I. So that's kind of nice. We have this continuity. And I try to, as soon as I finish my live shot from the rooftop, as you're saying, I jump on my bicycle. It's the quickest way to get home. And I rush home through the traffic, because if you take a car, forget it. You know the Rome traffic.
So it's the shortest distance or the shortest route between the rooftop
and home
at EWTN News Nightly and home. And so you get on, and then you're there for the kids.
Spanish Steps, and then I get home and the children are there, and then they are my focus, they are my priority. We do homework, we do early dinner, and we try to fit it all in, don't we?
Okay, we're on the same wavelength, except I am not bicycling up Massachusetts Avenue. It's like this.
You have a longer
happening.
commute. No.
Right. Well, we have just been so grateful to have you here. I wish you could be here all the time, but then you can't stand on the Vatican the roof overlooking the Vatican. I don't know.
Can you anchor from there? Isn't that
Perfect.
an idea?
Let's just tell Michael Warsaw, who's the chairman and CEO, I think we need to go move the show to Rome. What do you think?
One day we'll do it.
One day. All right. Juliette Lindley, thank you so much. We'll see you in Rome next week.
Thank you. It's been a lovely week, Lauren. It's been great. Thanks.
The Vatican sets up Facebook groups to reach out to young people ahead of two important meetings this year. Bishops will gather in Rome in October to discuss young people and faith. A pre-meeting is next week, and the social media giant is helping solicit feedback in 6 languages. The Vatican says the goal is to hear about the lives and challenges of people worldwide ages 16 to 29. Finally tonight, a Christian woman in a Pakistani prison proclaims a miracle. Speaking to Aid to the Church in Need, Asia Bibi says she is allowed to keep a rosary from Pope Francis. The Holy Father gave it to Bibi's family last month at the Vatican. She says it is the first religious object officials have let her keep. And now she needs to come home. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.